maybe it's up for you to guess. What I will talk about is basically a transformation crisis, transformation conflict. Basically what I will argue is that socioeconomic and political development are intertwined very intrinsically. On the one hand, you will see that strong socioeconomic development puts transformation pressure on political orders. On the other hand, though, and I think this is something that is underappreciated, for instance, by modernization theory, I will argue that if this transformation conflict, if this transformation crisis remains unsolved for too long, it would also put pressure on economic development by undermining the ability of a society to innovate. But before we get started, I will answer your first question, because your first question is always, wherever I speak, Marc, is Thailand not totally unique? So, to answer that already, no it's not. Basically, it's really absolutely not unique. I have brought you here some evidence that was gathered by Joshua Kulancic from the American Council of Foreign Relations. He looked into transformation crisis in many countries around the world over the last 14 years, 15 years. That's not even the comprehensive list. The list is actually much longer than that. I'm not going to run through that, but I think what you should appreciate when you look at all these countries, and basically his argument is all these crises, all of these conflicts, all of these campaigns against elected governments, they're very, very, very similar, up to a point where it's almost awkward how similar they are. So I think what you should get from that slide is it's a long list. And Thailand is just one of those countries on that list. Okay, you mentioned 3 times, so that makes you a little bit unique in that sense. But on the other hand, maybe that's not something to be proud of. Basically, the argument would be to say there is a secret script running through all these transformation crises. What kind of countries do we have here? The first thing to notice is that it's not really developing country in the strictest old sense that we're looking at, but these are countries that have undergone socioeconomic transformation, rapid economic growth over a period of 20 to 30 to sometimes 40 years. So what you see, and I think this is a couple of arguments that have been made, for instance, by Andrew Walker, you see that there is classes emerging in the provinces, emerging middle classes, but also you have the population, the countryside, is lifted out of poverty by this strong economic growth over decades. So what you see is that these countries have already undergone structural transformation, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Actually, that's what my talk is all about. The other thing, what makes these countries special, with a little bit of the exceptions of the countries of the Arab Spring, is that most of these countries have already installed some sort of de facto, defunct, but nonetheless liberal democracy, electoral democracy. So what's already in place is the right of the population, the right of the society to select, elect their own leaders, and they're making active use of that. What happened in all of these societies, and I don't know if you remember the list, think about people like Hugo Chavez, who calls himself a Bolivarian socialist, Mr. Yanukovych in Ukraine, who is maybe a friend of oligarchs, Mr. Erdogan in Turkey, who calls himself a moderate Islamist, or Mr. Mursi, who calls himself a real Islamist, or Mr. Thaksin, who you may call a neoliberal tycoon. What do they have in common? Well, they have one thing in common. I think they have figured out a pretty good formula how to win elections. And that formula is basically to cater to the hopes and needs of these emerging populations in the provinces, and actually giving them something that have not been provided to them before. So that gives a really good formula to win elections, one after the other. Most of these leaders have won several elections in a row. However, maybe we call them political entrepreneurs to get the ideology out of it. These political entrepreneurs, once they are elected, quickly turn what Joshua Kulancic calls into elected autocrats. So what they do is basically starting to take apart the very little democracy that has been founded. I'm going to come back to that point later. It's really important to say, has been founded by the middle class. I think that's a really interesting point that we're going to get back at. But basically they're putting pressure on the opposition, putting pressure on the media, putting pressure on independent commissions, on the courts, and they're basically undermining the checks and balances and the rule of law that was actually supposed to take check of majority rule in the constitutions that are already in place. So they become elected autocrats, and these elected autocrats threaten the middle class. Why is that? And I think this is something really important to understand here. Because the middle class suddenly finds itself in a permanent minority in the very democracy they founded. Why? Well, basically you could say because the establishment political parties have not figured out how to reach out to the population majority, and that's why they cannot win elections. I said I'm not going to talk about Thailand. Maybe I do, maybe I don't. But think about, for instance, Turkey. Mr. Erdogan's AKP is winning one election after the other, and the old Atatürk establishment party can't do anything about it because they're still having their programs focused on the middle class and elite in Istanbul. And that's why they cannot win elections. So the middle class gets really a little bit hopeless there, that they're losing one election after the other, and that things get worse because now the safeguards in the constitutions that were supposed to protect them, rule of law, checks and balances, all of these nice things that democracy has on offer are being undermined, are being taken away. So they fear the abuse of power by the elected autocrat. And there's another thing, I think this is really interesting, and Ed already got a little bit into that. Maybe you saw that I recently wrote a study on corruption. Corruption is a really interesting topic in itself, but I'm not interested in corruption as such. I'm interested in corruption discourses. This is what people think about corruption, how they talk about it. And discourse, I would define it as what is happening and what should be done. That's a discourse. And that is not just blah blah, that is power. And I think it has a lot to do how the conflicts here are structured. So what's happening is that corruption as the abuse of power is basically a reflection of the patronage system which is actually governing these countries behind the facades. The old patronage system, which is this. A patron rewards his supporters, protects his clients, favors his king, distributes the spoils, cuts out those who did not support him, and crushes his enemies. That, in a nutshell, is a patronage system, and this is the actual political system, at work behind the facade. This is what's governing these countries, and what's interesting is that maybe it's a little bit, or from the perspective, the discourse of the middle class, a little bit less vulgar in the capital, and a little bit more archaic in the countryside. So there are grades of difference, but basically the patronage system runs everywhere, and I think you know that from your private life. So what's happening is that the representatives that have been elected, the ministers, the members of parliament, all the people who come into office by elections, bring with them the very logic of the patronage system. So what they do, well, they reward supporters, they favor their king, they distribute the spoils, right? And that is being perceived by the middle class as a fallback into darker times of corruption and nepotism. This is the origin of the corruption narrative, and this is the strongest mobilization force for hundreds of thousands of people around the world in this sort of country. So I give you in a nutshell what I call the middle class discourse. Is the middle class discourse is a discourse of fear, which I think in the case of Thailand is particularly weird from the perspective of a foreign. Because if you look at yourself, your position between China, India, and Southeast Asia, so I think you just have to sit here, and it's going to be a golden moment in your history. But Thailand seems to be totally dominated by fear. Fear of state bankruptcy, fear of moral decay, fear of civil war, fear of state failure, so there's one, all of them. So what is this fear discourse nurtured from? Well, it's basically the corruption discourse, which is the very center of it. And that corruption discourse goes as such. The middle class fears that it's being robbed by corrupt politicians who take away their money to buy votes from the greedy poor with populist projects. That's the 5 elements of the populist corruption discourse of the middle class. This is where the anger and the rage and the fear come from, and this is what brings people to the street. So if you see the triggers of all these protests in all of these countries, yes, it's about the abuse of power. That's usually the trigger. But what motivates the people, what drives them out, is usually this rage about this utter corruption that they perceive. And I will argue later that this is a reflection that the middle class is not content, did not agree to the deal that's been given. And when I say deal, I think on purpose I use the word deal because it reminds us of Roosevelt's New Deal, which basically means the social compromise at the basis of the social contract. This is going to be what I'm going to talk about today. But let's just play out these little crises a little more and see what's happening. So the middle class gets really frustrated, gets really afraid, so they turn to their friends, the elites, who are really happy to help because they are, as elites do, in a struggle over the political and economic control of the country. Right? So they're supporting this, and you see interventions by the old elites into the political process in order to overthrow these elected autocrats. These interventions can have the form of judicial interventions, they can have the form of military interventions, and they sometimes succeed and sometimes they don't. And what's even more interesting is that even if they succeed in the short run, some of these elected autocrats come back on the electoral ticket. Mr. Chavez did, for instance. Mr. Erdogan just did a couple of weeks ago. And here in this country, Mr. Thaksin did twice, right? So even though the elites intervening into the political process, the population is voting back, or sometimes just bringing back by demonstrations, their favorite leader. So that's basically a secret script of transformation. And Mr. Ian Bremmer even has a curve for that. It's called the J curve. And he will argue this. If you open up a political system, opening up meaning liberalizing, giving political rights, etc., what you're going to see is that very, very quickly stability starts to decrease. And only after a very long transformation, I'm going to talk about what that possibly could be, the stability will go back slowly, 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 gradually. Right? So that's a typical transformation. That where that little lizard is, that little thunder, that is the transformation crisis, and this is where you find all of these countries. Just to clarify, this is not an automatic transition at all. There is no such thing as an automatic transition, but it shows you how stability decreases and increases with the increasing stability of a country. So, I will analyze this on 4 levels. And like I said, I'm not so much interested on the surface. I'm not so much interested in the actors, their coalitions, their objectives, what they want, what they don't want. I think there's other people who can tell you that much better. I think 2 of them are on the panel here today. So I don't have to talk about the red and the yellow alliances and their leaders and what they want and what they ultimately did. And I think all of these things have been talked about a lot. What I do is to analyze the levels underneath. And I will argue that these levels underneath structure the political field for maneuver. They do frame the political playing field. I'm going to talk a lot about the political economy, which is basically the big picture. And the big picture of a transformation is the transformation from an agricultural, feudalist society towards an industrious, capitalist society. That's the big picture, and that is what's changing the political economy. That's the big picture. That transforms society, so that's the second level. I think a lot of people talking about the rise and decline of classes. I think that's a very important factor which changes, so to say, the balance of power in society. What is always somehow not really looked into, and I'm particularly interested in that, is people do not act according to their objective interests, or class interests. People act according to what they think their interests are. And this is, again, a source of power to define what people think their interests are and how they act by saying what is happening and what should be done. And this is the level of discourse. The discourse level is basically what defines, frames, and structures the political field. And we already heard three interesting discourses from Aja and Ed. I added maybe another one right now, and we will get into that. So that level is underappreciated in the analysis of conflicts, and I think this is a particularly interesting one. So let's see if that's going to work now. Like I said, I'm a bit nervous, so what we're going to do right now is this is my analysis of the political economy, the sociology, and discourse level, seen through basically a Thai artist and how they have interpreted this. So let's see if it's working. Oh, yeah, great. As you see, you see nothing. What is a transformation crisis, and how can society overcome it? A transformation crisis can occur when a society changes quickly without adapting its political system to the new social reality. Let's have a look how economic, cultural, and social changes work together to overstretch traditional political systems, creating deep crises of legitimacy. In a way, transformation societies are suffering from their own success. Decades of economic growth have created a modern economy. Such modern economies are not only bigger, but more complex than agricultural economies, providing the necessary infrastructure and public goods for a complex economy requires a highly effective governance system. Traditional governance systems were built for a different time with different needs. They are hopelessly overstretched in catering to the needs of a complex economy. So the first structural change eroding the traditional order is increased complexity. A complex economy diversifies society. In an agricultural economy, you could be a warrior, a monk, a merchant, a craftsman, or a farmer. You have relatively few professions. In a complex economy, you have web designers, yoga teachers, heart surgeons, and so on. Different lifestyles create different worldviews, different interests, and different values. Therefore, in a pluralist society, the noise of debate and conflict is not the exception, but the norm. Traditional political cultures are often centered around the notions of unity and harmony, and perceive diversity as divisive and conflict as decay. So the second structural change of overstretching the traditional order is diversity. Economic and social development creates winners and losers. New middle classes emerge in the provinces and demand equal participation in political and social life. The established middle class in the capital may see these demands as a threat. Along with the traditional elites, they are not prepared to accept these citizens as equals. The result is a long drawn-out social conflict over the political order. Hence the third structural change overstretching the traditional order is conflict. Complexity, diversity, and conflict work together to erode the old vertical society and create a more horizontal society. This is the point when the long-term trends become a practical problem. The top-down, exclusive decision-making mechanisms of the old order no longer work in a horizontal society. What is needed is a decentralized, participatory political order, a governance system which is able to satisfy the needs and demands of a complex economy and pluralist society. However, the question which political system fits best is by no means academic.
contrary, the very core of the transformation conflict lies a political struggle over the political order. It is an all-out political conflict between those who seek to conserve the status quo and those who want change. But a transformation crisis is more than a power struggle. It is a rivalry between worldviews, a clash between all codes, a competition over what is the truth. A transformation conflict shakes the foundations of society, questions identities, and disrupts traditions. It is a polarized, emotional, sometimes explosive conflict over the fundamental question how people want to live together in a society. If you look at the transformation path of dozens of countries, strikingly similar patterns can be found. Once a country starts opening up its political system, stability quickly decreases. Only after the prolonged conflicts have been resolved through social compromise, stability slowly begins to increase. In other words, transformations are a rough ride, where things can get messy. The challenge for every developing society is to get through this rough patch as quickly and safely as possible. Of course, some may think that it's not necessary to open up the political system. Especially when things get messy, they seek to rush back to the safe shore of authoritarian rule. A quick coup d'etat may indeed create short-term stability. However, these rollbacks do not work in the long run. The structural changes at work will continue to cripple the political system and choke development. Sooner or later, society has no choice but to open up the political system again. The pressure to open up is not theoretical, but driven by urgent practical problems which cannot be tackled with the old tools. How to satisfy the growing demands for public goods if the middle class does not accept to be taxed? How to deal with demands for greater participation if traditional elites do not accept all citizens as equals? How to process the vast amount of information needed to steer a complex economy when only few people have the authority to make decisions? In order to tackle these and many more challenges, the political operating system needs to be upgraded. The governance system needs to be able to process more information. This can only be done by the decentralization of the decision-making process to include more people. A basic mechanism is needed to determine who has the mandate to make decisions. Only elections can collect this legitimacy. Fuses are needed to limit majority rule to the rules of the game. Only a system of checks and balances holds these boundaries. New tools are needed to cope with sensitive and politicized problems such as corruption. Only institutions with a track record of proven impartiality will create this legitimacy. Only democracy has the necessary power sharing and mediation mechanisms to tackle all these challenges. In order to resolve the transformation conflict, society needs to renegotiate the social contract. On a political level, this means to adapt the political order to the new balance of power. On a social level, it means to strike a social compromise between all classes. This means the elites accept democracy as the only game in town and start to make their electoral platforms more inclusive and responsive to win a mandate supported by the majority of citizens. The majority, in turn, accepts limitations to majority rule as long as full capabilities and equal life chances for all are provided. Equally important to the content of the social contract is the process how it was agreed upon. This has to do with the nature of institutions. Rules are nothing but a piece of paper until all sides agree to live by these rules. If rules are imposed by one side or the other, it will be resisted. Therefore, it is of utmost importance that the reform processes include all stakeholders from all sides.
Yes, so that is basically the story through the eyes of the time. Almost makes me look cute. So, just in a nutshell what's happening, and then get to the real tricky part, which is how to actually resolve a crisis like that. Because I think what the point is here is that the structural transformation will erode the old political order. That's basically what I'm trying to argue here. However, the new political order will not emerge automatically. The new political order will be the outcome of a struggle. There's no automatic transition towards democracy or whatever there may be. There will be a political struggle, and that political struggle will determine how that outcome will look like. So, nonetheless, you cannot ignore the structural drivers. So, as we all know, I'm not talking about Thailand today. If some people may think there is a shortcut towards this transformation, it will not work because the structural drivers basically push forward the transformation anyway. So the erosion of the old traditional order will continue. A social contract is a very abstract idea, and I think the interpretation of the social contract that you have here in Thailand is basically, it's a constitution. And I think this is an extremely narrow view of what a social contract is. I think all of you saw that Achan Niti wrote a very interesting article in the Bangkok Post 2 weeks ago about the cultural constitution of Thailand. I think this is a much better way to understand what the social contract actually is. I will argue that if there is a cultural constitution, there may be also a social constitution or a social contract. So that's maybe what's really governing the behavior of the people, and basically is the law behind the facades. However, to make things more complicated, and after all, this is the faculty of economics here, the problem is, as if it wouldn't be already enough to completely reform the entire institutional setup of the society, unfortunately, the world around Thailand doesn't stop. And that means your development model, the way that you organize economic growth, which was really successful over the last 30 years, is coming to an end. So unfortunately, at the same time where you have this kind of Hercules task of reforming the political order, at the same time, the economic order also has to be reformed. And these things are deeply intertwined, and I will argue why. The politics and economics cannot be separated. And that has to do with the only way to overcome a political crisis, which is a social compromise. I will come to that in a second, but already keep in mind that in order to strike the social compromise, in order to enter the new social contract, what is needed is a shift in the development path, a shift towards a development model that provides full capabilities for all. What's full capabilities for all? That's something that Amartya Sen has pretty much spelled out. So that's the idea that society, which is the private sector and the state, provide the full opportunities of each individual in the society to fully participate in political, social, economic, and cultural life. And that has to be active by the provision of healthcare, education, infrastructure, streets, roads, and political stability. So we're talking about public goods. The new economic development model must provide public goods. Otherwise, you cannot strike a social compromise. So this is why it's connected. However, the challenge is this. Not all stakeholders are interested in change. A lot of stakeholders actually benefit from the status quo. And these stakeholders will resist change. And this is why the outcome of a transformation crisis will be the outcome of a struggle between those who want to uphold the status quo and those who seek change. So the challenge really is, how do you organize the political process? How do you organize a broad societal coalition in order to mobilize enough political leverage, enough political muscle to win the struggle with the status quo coalition? That is the real challenge of a transformation, not facts and figures, they matter too, but how do you actually organize a political struggle? This is what's happening if you don't succeed. There are societies who get stuck in the transformations, the vicious cycle of transformation. And that is a problem not only for the political order, but also for economic development. I think the underlying idea in this country is often that you can't have the cake and eat it. That you can't get stability back and economic growth without reforming the political economy. or you cannot. And what's happening is that more and more conflict will actually emerge in a society. And if you have more and more conflict, a lot of people will get afraid of this process because a lot of people are invested in the status quo. And of course you can say they're invested, they benefit from the political economy, so that's the easier part. But people are also emotionally invested in the status quo. This is the world that they've been born into. This is the world they grew up with. This is the world they hold dear in their heart. So when the world suddenly changes overnight, and we're talking a very short period of only one generation, that's the generation of your parents basically. For them, the world changes too quick. And maybe it's also a lot of insecurity where all of this is going. So suddenly, what is actually a struggle over the political economy and the political order turns into a struggle over symbols. Symbols on which identities are built. And I think this makes it toxic. This is what brings the aggression and the emotional turmoil into this. So it's more than just a transformation on the technical level. It is also a struggle over the basic questions: who are we? What does it mean to be a citizen of this country? This is why it's emotional. And if a society gets stuck in this too long, the whole idea can turn into a fear of change as such. And this is where it gets really dangerous. Because if some people fear change as such, they may come up with the wrong answers. What causes this change? And instead of talking about all the structural changes that we're talking about right now, they may start talking about individuals' scapegoats. In my country, that was fascism, right? So we came up with scapegoats. We said, these are the ones who are causing all this trouble. So exterminating those troublemakers will get us back into an imagined golden path. That's the idea of fascism. And I think particularly in these virulent times of rapid change, this is the danger that we're facing. And if that gets overhand, society loses the ability to innovate, politically and economically. So if you look at the growth path of Thailand, like all of the emerging economies around the world, basically the first growth spurt, the first big leap is extractive growth. Everyone can do that, right? Cheap labor, natural resources, so you get maybe up to coming to an upper middle income economy. But after that, you have to transform the economy to something else. An information economy, a knowledge-based economy, an economy which is driven by productivity growth on the idea of innovation. So what I'm trying to say here is the middle income trap is not an economic trap. The middle income trap is a political trap based on psychology. It is that society does not embrace change anymore, is afraid of change, and this is why you have to address the transformation crisis, and you cannot get economic growth without addressing the underlying crisis of social justice. So look at Thailand. Implementing this in a situation of political crisis obviously is a real challenge. Because basically what happened to all these emotional processes, all the people who got hurt and all the conflicts, is that people are more and more polarized. So what you see is that the democratic center is being deserted. People are moving towards the extremes of the spectrum. More and more extremists are dominating the political sphere because in the center there is no social foundation, a social coalition which stands up for the defense of democracy. And if there is void in the center, the extremists rule. This is why, and this is I think something that is particularly interesting here. A majority is what's driving democratization. A majority is not enough to consolidate democracy. A majority breaks up the old order, but in order to consolidate the new order, you need to bring in the middle class. Without the middle class, there is no stability, because basically there's a choice. The middle class can continue to support the old elites to uphold the status quo, and then they will prevail, or at least rock the boat frequently. Or the middle class can change the boat and team up with the other emerging classes. Then change becomes inevitable. So basically, a democracy or a stable political system needs a social foundation in the center. And this is what's lacking in this country, I believe. There is no social foundation in the center. So how do you get that social foundation in the center? Well, basically by striking a social compromise. I think the basic social compromise between the elites and the majority population is straightforward. And this is what I already mentioned. The elites accept democracy is the only game in town, but they will be able to get an electoral mandate by reaching out to the majority of the population. By providing full capabilities to the majority population, the elites maybe start winning elections again. On the other hand of the deal is that the majority population accepts that majority rules is limited. Limited by checks and balances, limited by the rule of law. What they get back in return is better opportunities, full capabilities to live a self-empowered life, fully participate in political, economic, cultural, and social life. That's the deal between the elites and the majority population. Now we come back to our friends in the middle class. Most of you probably belong to the middle class, so I'm basically talking about you. The middle class is not content with that deal. They don't like it. Because why? Because they have to pay. This entire idea about populism and vote buying is a reflection of that the middle class is paying for the party. All of these capabilities, the healthcare, the education, the streets, the trains, the high-speed trains, they have to be paid. And they have to be paid by taxes. So the middle class is afraid, wait a minute, we're paying the taxes, we're not getting anything for that. We get bad social services, and we don't even get nothing for what we pay for, which, by the way, isn't true objectively, because you can measure that. The World Bank came up with an interesting figure, is that 72% of the public funds are spent in Bangkok. So what's actually happening in Thailand is that the provinces are subsidizing the capital, not the other way around. But we're talking about discourse, and sometimes the discourse, it can be totally shifted. So the middle class is not content. So the deal, the new deal that the middle class may accept, and they accepted it in many countries around the world, is to say, what you receive for your taxes is social peace, good governance, and public service. That is the social compromise. And as you can see, a lot of countries around the world went through exactly those kind of transformation crises, and they resolved their transformation crisis with this very basic social compromise. It may look a little bit different in Latin America than in Western Europe. It may look a little bit different in Germany or in France, but by and large, it's a very similar idea. And even the United States and the United Kingdom had a social contract like that. It was basically Roosevelt's New Deal. Unfortunately, it's been cancelled by neoliberals in the early 80s, and I think that may be the real root cause for the troubles that the United States is facing right now. So, that's basically my argument. Transformation is inevitable. Transformation is driven by structural drivers. So, you have to try to resolve the riddle, which is this transformation crisis. You can only resolve it with a social compromise. But a social compromise is not easy to strike in an atmosphere of polarized politics. So you need to come up with a new formula, which is a social compromise. Many other societies have done it, and I think Thailand can do it too. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marc SAXER. There's a lot of things you said, and I'm not sure I can summarize it adequately, but I'll try my best. ก็คุณ Marc SAXER นะครับได้พูดถึงวิกฤตการเมืองไม่ได้เจาะจงว่าเป็นวิกฤตการเมืองของไทยแต่ว่าเป็นวิกฤตการเมืองในหลายๆประเทศว่าเป็นวิกฤตที่เขาเรียกว่า transformation crisis คือวิกฤต การเปลี่ยนผ่านทางเศรษฐกิจและการเมืองคุณมาร์คบอกว่า economic development กับ political development เนี่ยแยกขาดจากกันไม่ได้วิกฤตการเมืองเนี่ยส่วนหนึ่งจึงมีสาเหตุที่เป็นสาเหตุทางเศรษฐกิจด้วยทีนี้ในประเทศที่มี transformation crisis วิกฤตการเปลี่ยนผ่านทางเศรษฐกิจและการเมืองเนี่ยเริ่มด้วยการที่มีประชาธิปไตยที่รูปร่างอัปลักษณ์อยู่แต่อย่างน้อยก็ยังเสรีและทำงานได้ที่คุณมาร์คเรียกว่า deform but liberal democracy คือเป็นประชาธิปไตยที่ผิดรูปผิดร่างแต่ว่าก็ยังสามารถทำงานได้และก็ยังเสรีอยู่ทีนี้ประชาธิปไตยรูปแบบนี้เนี่ยทำให้เกิด elected autocrat สิ่งที่คุณมาร์คเรียกว่า elected autocrat คือเราอาจจะแปลว่าเผด็จการที่ได้รับการเลือกตั้งเผด็จการที่ได้รับการเลือกตั้งเนี่ยคุณมาร์คบอกว่าบ่อนทำลายกระบวนการประชาธิปไตยอยู่บางส่วนแล้วก็ยังคุกคามชนชั้นกลางทำไมถึงชนชั้นกลางถึงรู้สึกว่าตัวเองถูกคุกคามเพราะว่าชนชั้นกลางมองว่าpatronage system หรือว่าระบอบอุปถัมภ์เนี่ยชนชั้นกลางไม่ได้เข้าไปมีส่วนร่วมด้วยไม่ได้ประโยชน์และยังคุกคามตัวเองด้วยเพราะว่า patronage system มีคุณสมบัติอยู่หลายอย่างอย่างเช่นเป็นระบอบที่สนับสนุนผู้สนับสนุนตัวเองผู้ที่สนับสนุนระบอบ2คือfavor พรรคพวกคือให้อภิสิทธิ์ต่อพรรคพวกตัวเอง3คือคุกคามผู้ต่อต้านทีนี้ชนชั้นกลางมองว่าประชานิยม populism เนี่ยเป็นรูปแบบหนึ่งของระบบอุปถัมภ์ซึ่งเป็นภัยต่อตัวเองชนชั้นกลางก็เลยต่อต้านเผด็จการที่มาจากการเลือกตั้งจนเปิดทางให้ชนชั้นนำเดิมเนี่ยเข้ามาแทรกแซงด้วยในรูปแบบของการแทรกแซงโดยทหารหรือแทรกแซงโดยตุลาการMarc, if you don't mind, Marc, if you can turn to the page where you have that diagram, the relation between stability and openness. Please, thank you. ทีนี้คุณมาร์คก็อธิบายว่าโดยปกติแล้วประเทศที่ปกติแล้วเนี่ยมันมีความสัมพันธ์อยู่ระหว่างเสถียรภาพของสังคมกับความเปิดกว้างของสังคมความเสรีของสังคมทีนี้เริ่มแรกเนี่ยสังคมอาจจะเริ่มที่ระดับเสถียรภาพสูงแต่ว่าไม่มีเสรีภาพเลยก็คือว่าจุดแรกของกราฟใช่ไหมครับเสร็จแล้วเนี่ยพอเวลาผ่านไปเสถียรภาพก็อาจจะลดลงเพราะว่ามีชนชั้นใหม่เกิดขึ้นมาชนชั้นเดิมเนี่ยมีฐานะทางเศรษฐกิจดีขึ้นเรียกร้องอะไรมากขึ้นก็เรียกร้องให้สังคมเนี่ยโอเพนมากขึ้นอันนี้เนี่ยทำให้เสถียรภาพลดลงเพราะว่าชนชั้นใหม่เนี่ยพยายามจะเรียกร้องสถานะใหม่จะเรียกร้องสิทธิทางสังคมพอเสถียรภาพลดลงถึงจุดหนึ่งเนี่ยในที่สุดแล้วเนี่ยเสถียรภาพมันก็จะมากขึ้นเองอันนี้คือที่คุณมาพยายามจะบอกแต่ในประเทศที่มี transformation crisis เนี่ยชนชั้นกลางและชนชั้นนำเนี่ยพยายามจะหยุดในจุดที่เสถียรภาพมันต่ำมากๆแล้วหยุดในจุดที่มีสายฟ้าสีเหลืองๆเนี่ยครับคือทำให้สังคมที่ไม่สามารถมีเสรีภาพขึ้นได้ทีนี้คุณม้าบอกว่าในวิกฤต transformation crisis เนี่ยวิกฤตการเปลี่ยนผ่านทางเศรษฐกิจและการเมืองเนี่ยมันมีอันตรายอยู่ก็คือว่ามันจะทำให้สังคมเนี่ยติดอยู่ในวงจรอุบาทของ transformation crisis แล้วก็หากปล่อยอยู่ในวิกฤตนี้นานเกินไปเนี่ยก็อาจจะมีอันตรายเพราะว่าหลายฝ่ายจะเริ่มสู้กันที่ไม่ใช่เนื้อหาแต่ที่สัญลักษณ์แต่ละฝ่ายอาจจะหลงประเด็นแล้วก็เริ่มหาแพทย์รับปากซึ่งเป็นสาเหตุที่ทำให้เกิดระบอบอย่างฟาสซิสต์ทีนี้คุณมาร์คเสนอว่าทางออกจากวิกฤตการเปลี่ยนผ่านนี้เนี่ยก็คือว่าแต่ละฝ่ายต้องเจรจาสัญญาประชาคมใหม่ที่คุณมาร์คเรียกว่า new social contract โดย ฝ่ายชนชั้นนำและชนชั้นกลางจะต้องยอมให้คนส่วนใหญ่เนี่ยมีที่ทางในการเมืองและชนชั้นนำและชนชั้นกลางต้องเรียนรู้ที่จะเอาใจคนส่วนใหญ่อันนี้เป็นการประนีประนอมของชนชั้นนำและชนชั้นกลางสิ่งที่เขาได้คืออะไรสิ่งที่เขาได้ก็คือว่าเขาจะได้สันติภาพเขาจะได้ social peace แล้วก็เสถียรภาพส่วนคนส่วนใหญ่ต้องยอมอะไรบ้างคนส่วนใหญ่ต้องยอมประนีประนอมโดยยอมรับว่า majority rule เนี่ยมีข้อจำกัดคือคนส่วนใหญ่ต้องยอมรับว่าอำนาจของตัวเองเนี่ยต้องถูกจำกัดอยู่บ้างสิ่งที่เขาได้ตอบแทนก็คือเสถียรภาพทางการเมืองและpublic goods